自動でお風呂を沸かす。お風呂の線が来ましたか？自動でお風呂を沸かす。
Hello and welcome to another episode of No Such Thing as a Fish, a weekly podcast, this week coming to you live from Gothenburg. My name is Dan Schreiber. I am sitting here with Anna Toshinsky, Andrew Hunter-Murray, and James Harkin. And once again, we have gathered round the microphones with our 4 favorite facts from the last 7 days. And in no particular order, here we go. Starting with fact number 1, and that is Andy.
My fact is that the novel Dune, one of the greatest sci-fi novels ever, was rejected 20 times before being printed by a publisher who specialized in car repair manuals.
Wow.
This is because this is the book festival here in Gothenburg.
Yeah.
And one of the themes this year is space. This is about a book about space.
Taking into consideration that we only have an hour, can you explain what Dune is?
Oh, it's so great. It's a sci-fi novel. It's set on the desert planet of Arrakis, and it's all about the rise of a young messiah, or is he? Paul Atreides. Of course, there's the Harkonnen family, and there are giant worms. And anyway, it's a fantastic work of 60s sci-fi. You know,
Frank Herbert, right?
Frank Herbert was the author.
Yeah.
And it had been serialized in a magazine, but it's really long. I mean, it's really long, Dune. And it was way too long to be a book, according to most publishers who've got a look at it. And no one wanted to print it, even in 3 volumes. They just said, no, thanks. So he got lots of rejections. And then he met a guy called Sterling E. Lanier of Chiltern Books, and they specialized in car repair manuals. And they had some magazines as well, like Jeweler's Circular and Dry Goods Economist. So
Is that like just a Goods Economist magazine, but it's very, very dry?
very dry.
No jokes in there at all.
And they had done some sci-fi books before. It wasn't their first. Some sources online say it's the first time they did. They had a little line in
They'd
sci-fi.
recently kind of bought another publisher, hadn't they,
Yeah.
called Greenberg Publisher, and Greenberg was a sci-fi publisher.
Exactly, yeah.
And that had been started by a guy called Martin Greenberg, who was also the first publisher of Isaac Asimov's Foundation trilogy. So they did have a little bit of
They
background.
did, definitely,
Yeah,
yeah.
right.
But it wasn't a success, even with that little bit of background. Sales were so bad that Lanier was sacked a year later. So
Wow.
for all the publishing people who are in the room today, don't take risks, is the message.
I remember when you read this book, Andy, because you did it on a No Such Thing as a Fish tour when we went to Australia. And Andy's one of those people, when he starts a book, he needs to finish it. And this book has, like 6 appendices at the end. I used to be sat next to Andy on the plane, and it's a long flight to Australia, and I got 0 chat from him. He was the most dull man on tour reading
Those were the
Dune.
days, weren't they, when Andy didn't talk to us? I've actually started reading it this week.
Oh, yeah.
And I've got 40 pages in. And I'll be honest, I am one of those people that doesn't have to finish every book that I read. So
Would
we'll
you say
see.
it's more or less exciting than a car repair manual? You know?
Oh, that's interesting, because I've never read a car repair manual, even though I've owned many cars.
Right, yeah, fair enough. Do you know, James, you'll hate this. James has a big fear of mushrooms, but there is an origin story to this whole Dune saga, which is that Frank Herbert loved studying fungi, and it was mushrooms that inspired him to do Dune. And this is according to a book called Mycelium Running. The author, Paul Stamets, sat down with him, and he basically said the magic spice, which is in the book.
So that's like the drug that they're all going after.
Exactly, that's the spores of the mushroom. The bending of space and time, that's him tripping on mushrooms, psychedelia. That's when he was off his tits. The giant worms, those are maggots digesting the mushrooms that he would have witnessed in the process of studying them. So it's basically a tribute to the mushroom.
Yeah. And also,
this book.
he made huge contributions to the world of mushrooms, didn't he, Frank Herbert?
What?
As well as writing apparently unsuccessful book at the time. He apparently, and this is according to Paul Stamets, and who was really good mates with him from the 80s, he said that Frank was this avid mushroom collector, and he got really upset when he would have to throw away less than perfect wild chanterelles. So instead, he mixed it with water and salt and made a big slurry paste. And he spread it around the bottom of new fir trees, and then a load of chanterelle mushrooms grew there. And this may not sound exciting at all to anyone here, or me, but to mushroom people, to mycologists, they had no idea that mushrooms could grow at the base of young trees. So he discovered that by placing a slurry of old mushrooms at the bottom of a young tree, you could make some new mushrooms.
Wow,
And-
that does sound like an important contribution to me.
Yeah, and more important than June, maybe?
Yeah, definitely.
Maybe.
Wow.
40 pages in, I would say yes.
Well, 900 pages in, I can tell you. That, and the other cool thing about Dune, so it's set on a deserty planet. It's all very, very sandy. And he was inspired to write this in part by some real life dunes. So you can visit.
Oh.
I think, in fact, they run tourist visits to the dunes of Florence, Oregon. And they were threatening to overrun the city in the early 20th century.
Yeah,
But
he hated these sand dunes, didn't he?
Well, the sand dunes were widely hated because they were encroaching on the city. They'd move, and he was researching a program by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and they were fixing huge grasses into these dunes to stabilize them. European beach grass, it's called, and it's got very deep roots. It locks the dunes in place. And the plot of Dune is about this desert planet and how it can be turned green again. I mean,
Really?
exactly. And over the course of the novels, slight spoiler, the planet goes from desert to green and then back to desert. And
Oh,
guess what's happening in the desert now in Florence, Oregon?
Giant worms?
No. They are now trying to get rid of these grasses, which they introduced as an invasive species 100 years ago, because they're messing up with the ecology of the region. So
Really?
the same thing is happening all over
So
again.
it's a premonition book, basically.
Kind of, yeah.
God, so you're telling me humans introduced a new species to try and fix stuff, and it actually went even more wrong than it was before? That
afraid so.
astonishes me.
It's amazing. How many copies did you say, Andy, that it sold? It's like 14 million, 20 million. It's a big,
don't know.
big
Yeah,
seller,
yeah.
right? It's had a huge cultural impact. I was trying to find out a few things of where it's bled into pop culture and so on. And there's a great story that Iron Maiden, the band, they named the song Dune, and it was inspired entirely by the book. But they had to ask, or they wanted to ask permission from Frank Herbert to say, would you give us your blessing? And they got a statement back from him, a little message that said, Frank Herbert doesn't like rock bands, particularly heavy rock bands, and especially bands like Iron Maiden. And so they had to change it to the title's now To Tame a Land, if anyone knows that
Well,
song.
can I tell you I made an anecdote? Me and Anna once went to a pub quiz with Bruce Dickinson from Iron Maiden, who's the lead singer.
Yeah.
And we sat with him through the whole quiz. We did the quiz. I think we won the quiz, in fact. And Anna was sat with Bruce the whole night and chatting to him and whatever. And the next morning I said, what did you think of Bruce? He's a nice guy, right? And Anna said, oh, yeah. I said, have you not heard of Iron Maiden? And she said, oh, I thought that was a made-up band.
What is it? I thought that Iron Maiden only existed in that song that goes, listen to Iron Maiden, baby.
Teenage Dirtbag.
Yeah?
I thought Teenage Dirtbag, the song, invented Iron Maiden.
Wow.
So it was astonishing. I know they'd done a pub quiz with him.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Frank Herbert had some gigs before his Dune breakthrough, and he was a wine critic for a while.
Was he?
See?
And he was a very, very assiduous at whatever he did. He was very devoted. I think this is why Dune is 19 million pages long. It's because he really researches everything. So as a wine critic, he not only insisted on being trained up on knowledge of all wine, he insisted on being trained to make wine himself, which actually is quite suspicious and is what I would insist on as well, by being a wine critic. But yeah, and he was a wine critic, and then he was a speechwriter for a Republican senator who I tried to find, he was called Guy Corden. It was in 1955, and I did a trawl of the newspaper archives looking for Guy Corden's name being paired with worms or mushrooms or space, and nothing. There's nothing.
No,
else.
he was very anti-Soviet, wasn't he? Back in the day. He was
He's into
part of
McCarthy.
that kind of McCarthyism where they're trying to root out all the commies.
I think he was a distant cousin of Joseph McCarthy.
That is Herbert was. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
Was he?
Yeah, he was.
Ah,
And
baddie.
you see that, I think, in some of the novels, don't you? There's kind of an anti-communist angle to
Yeah,
them. I
right.
believe so. Yeah.
Okay.
And the movies, obviously, we've all
Yeah.
watched the Dune movies. I watched the David Lynch one this week.
The big one.
When
The
was that
big
made?
one.
That was like
So there was,
1984.
so there's the massive ones that have been coming out in the last year or two.
Yeah.
But in 1984, David Lynch shot a version, and it's weird, I would say.
That's so odd for David Lynch.
But weirdly, it's just not quite weird enough to be David Lynch. So it's
Right.
like in that uncanny valley
Yeah.
of not being weird enough to be weird. It's really, really strange. But they filmed it in Mexico, and it was in an area where they had lots of rocks and plants and stuff like that, but they needed it to be like June, where none of these things existed. So apparently they spent 2 months stripping all of the plants, all of the animals from this area so that it would look like June.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Why not just go to Namibia or somewhere which has vast rolling sand?
Probably a tax thing.
Tax
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
So some very famous names in the movie. Sting, the musician's in
Yeah.
it. And one other person who's in it is Patrick Stewart of Star Trek.
It's so weird.
Yeah, right.
Honestly, like you watch it and suddenly Captain whatever he's called comes
yeah.
in.
But you know what's even weirder about that? This is why it's so weird. David Lynch hired Patrick Stewart, and then when Patrick Stewart showed up, he went, "This is the wrong Patrick Stewart. He got the wrong guy."
What?
Patrick Stewart, Captain Picard, was never meant to be in it. There's another actor called Patrick Stewart, and it went to the wrong person.
But was he already a sci-fi?
He was already
veteran,
doing
or-
stuff. No, I don't think so at that
No,
point.
he was
84.
like a
No.
theatre guy, wasn't
Yeah,
he?
he was a theatre guy.
Yeah.
And so then he got on to the set and did exactly what you did with Bruce Dickinson, which is he was introduced to Sting and had no idea who he was. He was like, what else do you do? And he's like, "Oh, I'm a musician." He's like, "Oh, that's really cool. I'll check your stuff out. That's exciting. What's it called?" And he's like, "We're the police." And he thought, "Oh, that's really nice. An armed service had put together a band, and you probably play fairs and stuff." Yeah.
That's so good. This first film that was released. So you saw it last night, right?
Yes, I did, yeah.
Was it easy to follow, hard to follow, somewhere in between?
It was hard to follow, I'll be honest.
It's quite
Yeah.
baffling because they try and crowbar a big book into a sort of longish film,
Yeah.
but that's a real squeeze. It is such a complicated film to watch, supposedly, that when the first film came out, audiences in cinemas were given a small printed glossary of terms to help them understand what was going on.
Oh, I could really have done with that, I'll be honest.
I've seen an original copy of these things. The typeface is so small that in a dark cinema you would be looking for ages for the term muad'Dib or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And by the time you look back, it'd be another scene. It just seemed like a terrible idea.
I think they put the lights on before and went, "Everyone have a quick read, familiarize yourself with what's coming up."
What,
Yeah.
memorise the glossary?
Or just get a brief idea. So we've got the modern Dune movies, and then there was the David Lynch in 1984, but there was meant to be another one in 1974, which was going to be directed by a guy called Alejandro Jodorowsky. And he basically said, "I want to make the full version of this." So it was going to be a 10 to 14 hour long movie. He had an extraordinary cast lined up. Everyone from Orson Welles, David Carradine, who was Kill Bill, Geraldine Chaplin. Orson Welles, he managed to convince to come onto the film by saying, "I will pay you really well, but also I'll get your favorite gourmet chef to prepare your meals every single day." And he was like, "Great, I'm in. Yeah, that works." But it never happened. And he had a bit of a fallout with Frank Herbert over the writing process of it. But this director believed that he didn't need to talk to Herbert because Herbert had extracted the novel initially from the collected unconscious of our world, and so it was plucked from some soup of ideas.
That's very-
That's
full
a
of
good
ideas.
anti-copyright argument, isn't it? When you're taken to court, well, it was all lingering in the air. It was an enormous kind of behemoth of a thing, and unsurprisingly, it never got made. But he hired Salvador Dali to be in it, and Dali insisted on only being in this film if he could become the highest-paid Hollywood actor ever. I think he must have been doing the whole thing as a joke, but so Frank Herbert agreed and said, "Fine, I will pay you $100,000 an hour to act in this film I'm doing." And then he reduced Dali's scenes so that he only needed him for an hour, and he set up the rest with a robotic. It says a robot lookalike. Now a robotic lookalike. I don't know if that means a lookalike to Dali, who was also kind of a robotic actor, or if they actually got a robot who looks like Dali to do
I
the
mean,
rest
in
of the
those
scenes.
days, that's just going to be a microwave with a mustache, isn't it?
Stop the podcast.
Stop the podcast.
Hi everyone, we'd like to let you know that this week we're sponsored by Squarespace.
Yes, that's right. If you don't know about Squarespace, you clearly don't build websites. And that's fine. But Squarespace is an all-in-one platform for entrepreneurs to stand out, create websites, grow brands, engage with your audiences. You can do it all easily on your terms. It's incredibly convenient and it's really well designed.
Yeah, it's absolutely an amazing place to make your website. Let's say you have a brand new business where you create amazing pictures of cats drinking Evian. And obviously everyone in the world wants to see those pictures, and they're so valuable that you can sell them for money. Well, Squarespace Squarespace will allow you to do that. It will allow you to put those pictures online. AI will help you with all of that, and it will even help you get your payments.
That's right. And there's a new feature they've introduced called Design Intelligence, which allows you to build a more personalized website that's more tailored to your needs and to create a kind of bespoke digital identity which sort of matches up so it all fits across the thing. So you don't have 16 different fonts, unless you're a font selling website, which is also absolutely fine. So if you would like to try it for yourself, just go to squarespace.com. You can get a free trial. And when you're ready to launch your website, if you go to squarespace.com/NSTAAF, you will save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.
That's right. So go to Squarespace, that's SQUARESPACE.com. It's not square and then press the space bar. It's definitely not that. Go there for your free trial, and then when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/NSTAAF to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Okay, on with the podcast.
On with the show.
I need to move us on, guys. It is time for fact number 2, and that is James.
Okay, my fact this week is that the largest known star is 3,000 times wider than the sun and is coincidentally called Whoa. Yes, so this is WOHG64, which I am choosing to pronounce Whoa. And it actually gets its name because it was discovered by astronomers Bengt Westerlund, Niels Olander, and Lager Hedden, who I think might be Swedish, actually. They're certainly from this part of the world. And the first letter of each of the names is WOH, and that's how it gets its name.
It kind of works if you mix it up, like, how? For the size, ow!
Ooh. No, it doesn't. No, you're right.
Yeah, this is amazing.
And it's a massive old star. It's if you can imagine the sun as a tiny grain of sand, then this star is about the size of a basketball.
What?
No, whoa!
I walk into them, don't I?
And it's kind of interesting because it's much cooler than you would imagine. I mean, it's cooler in that way, but cooler as in it's not very hot than you would expect from this kind of star. We don't really know why, and it's kind of at variance with the current theories of how stars are made. So that, for scientists, we find that really, really interesting when something doesn't quite fit in with our rules.
Yeah,
It
right.
means something else is going on that we can discover.
It's one of those things like the mushrooms at the bottom of the tree. You know, it's really, really exciting for the people who know about how stars are made. And then for a lot of us, it's like, okay.
Yeah. But
Good on you.
another point of analogy with it, if it was placed where our sun is, we would all be inside it now. It would come out, as far as Jupiter, in fact, it would come out way, 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 way further than the Earth at the moment.
Yeah.
But if it's not that hot, sounds like we'll be fine.
Yeah.
Just a nice warmth.
Yeah, exactly.
I like that the instrument that we use largely to observe it is called the Very Large Telescope.
Yes.
So science is great.
It's
Isn't it? Because we've got an extremely large telescope, haven't we? Which
Really?
there's and I think there's one bigger than that.
They are working on, I can't remember what it is. It's not the enormously large telescope.
Yeah.
Oh, it's the Very Hungry Telescope. That's it.
The Very Large Telescope interferometer that they're using to view Whoa, it's strong enough that it would be able to make out a tennis ball that is on the Opera House in Oslo from this room. But that's how good they...
Well, that puts it in context for me.
I was hoping for the people of Gothenburg that they might know where Oslo is.
I couldn't even point to Oslo from here. So that is amazing. And that's did you say an interferometer?
It's an interferometer, yeah.
I'd never heard of that.
Well, let's move on.
Do you know what the name of the most distant planet that we have found in the far reaches of the solar system is called?
No.
It's called Far Out.
Hang on.
Oh, really?
It's called Far Out, or at least it was. It was only the record holder for 2 months before they found something even further, which they called Far, Far Out. Very cool names.
Some suns, or some stars, sorry, are actually really not that hot. I get quite excited when you learn about stuff in the universe that you can sort of imagine making contact with. Like in fact, I was saying to James earlier that there's a fact I read once that is if you fell into a black hole that's 1,000 times bigger than the sun, theoretically you would survive. Now, obviously, you wouldn't for lots of reasons, but it wouldn't crush you theoretically. And I just like that because it's like, wow, me, a tiny human on Earth, could survive that. And I was amazed to read equally that there are these things called brown dwarfs, they're often called failed stars. So they're stars that they're not big enough to sustain nuclear fusion at their core, but their surface temperatures are so low. Some of them are as low as about like a mug of tea. So if you touched it, it would feel like just a hand warmer.
That's
Really?
cool.
Yeah, isn't that
They can get
amazing?
hot though, mugs of tea, can't they?
Yeah,
Super
this
hot.
is like a mug of tea when you've left it too long.
Oh, really?
A mug of
That
tea when
is-
you sip it and you go, oh, bollocks, you have to chuck it away.
You know those kind of failed stars. If they had a bit more mass, they would become stars, right? And the level that you have to get to become a star, that area is called the genes instability, which I think sounds like something a bit rude in your trousers. Oh, got a bit of a genes instability going on.
Don't mind me.
There are some stars, aren't there, which are kind of rogue, loose stars.
Oh, yeah.
They're hyperdense. They're about the size of our sun, but they many thousands of times the mass, and they're just
Okay.
barreling loose through space.
Wow.
As in they're not in a proper system.
Oh, that's amazing.
Rebels.
Like
They are.
Like in Street Fighter, like one of those Ryu balls.
What?
You know,
I didn't. Again, I've said it before and I'll say it again. I don't think it needed that layer of really nice analogy on top.
I just like to paint pictures, Andy.
But it is just like those. It's a random loose fireball just barreling through, and there's never been one I think that's entered our solar system or anything like that.
Okay.
But,
But if one does come this way, we're knackered.
oh yes, yeah.
Well, what's quite sweet about stars is, aside from these sort of Clint Eastwood loner stars, they're basically all, or 80, I think, estimated 85% of them come in pairs. And I actually find it amazing that if you're looking at the sky and you see a star, it's probably two stars. And if you look through a really powerful telescope, you'll see two. So yeah, 85% of stars, binary stars. Not our sun. Our sun's one of the special ones, which is on its own, I think. And mostly, I think they're primary star and then companion, which is like a smaller guy rotating around it. And the only way we know how big any stars are, like the only way we know how big this largest known WOA star is because they're in pairs. And so you take the barycenter, which is...
The Barry Centre.
Yeah, it's not an EastEnders thing. It's like...
We performed at the Barry Centre. It's in South Wales, isn't it?
Yeah, all stars rotate around South Wales. The barycenter is the center around which the two stars in the binary system rotate. And so you measure their distance from that and you watch them rotating and you hopefully watch one eclipse the other from Earth and you see kind of how long one takes to cross the other. And that's how we know how big they are. So solitary stars, the only way we know how big a star that's on its own is that we compare its brightness to the brightness of these binary stars whose size we know, and we say, okay, well, we guess it's about that size.
Oh, interesting.
Right.
Except the sun, because we're really close to the sun,
Yeah.
so we can measure that with a tape measure.
So it is amazing thinking of just how different everything else is to here.
Okay.
Because here we have conference centres and we have book festivals and we have wine glasses and we have tables, and I'm just pointing at things
We've
I
got
can see now.
June.
But we've got Dune.
I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
But get this, 99.9% of all matter that we have observed in space is not solid or liquid or gas. It's plasma. Because that's what the state of matter that stars are in. Well, there's loose ions, electrons, and it's kind of soup. So our sun is plasma. There's a bit of plasma on Earth. Lightning bolts and neon signs contain forms of
That's
plasma.
it?
And those two things, that 99.9% of the universe is plasma.
Aren't TVs plasma as well?
Yes.
I think it's the
Yeah.
same stuff.
I think it might be the same.
Is it the same? That's a good point. I don't know.
Yeah.
Shooting stars are multicolored. When you see a shooting star, but you need to look really hard, which is hard to do because obviously they appear and then they disappear quickly. But it's because so they're obviously a meteor flying through the Earth's atmosphere and they're burning up in the atmosphere. But because the meteors are made of lots of different elements, as they burn, they kind of react with the gases around them and they create like magnesium oxide or whatever, or all the different oxides which burn with different colours. So if you look closely, you'll see bright blue, they're bright purple,
Like
they're bright
fireworks, I
orange.
guess, right?
They are a very quick firework.
Yeah.
Yeah. But some animals, who see, like pigeons, see in more frames a second than we do, don't they? So they probably, when they see a shooting star, it's probably like fireworks as well.
Oh, no.
I'm not actually convinced that shooting stars exist, to be honest.
Have you never seen one?
Well, no, because my wife always sees them and goes, there's one, and I turn around and it's not there. I think the only logical thing is that they don't exist and everyone's having me on.
Yeah. A huge
Wait, James,
practical
there. Oh. Sorry.
So I've got some really exciting space news from the last couple of weeks.
Oh, yeah.
Go.
So there is a spacecraft that is going around the moons of Jupiter because it's looking for life
Yep.
in our solar system. And good news, we have found life in the solar system. This probe has managed to find life.
We haven't, and it hasn't.
Are you
And-
breaking the news of,
Yeah.
like, on...
They
Feels
trusted
like you
you
should have
with
gone
this
to the
news.
BBC with this.
August the 20th, they were flying by and they pointed their telescope at a planet called Earth. And they found that, yes, indeed, Earth is habitable.
That's so funny.
But obviously it is important because it shows that it's working.
Yeah.
Right? If they pointed to Earth and it says this is
I'm
what is
sorry.
habitable.
That is playing on easy mode.
I've got a neighbor who's got a really interesting space story. So he's an artist, and he did this really beautiful piece that's our solar system. And so I have a print of it in my son's room as well, Will's room. And a guy in America who's one of the co-hosts of Radiolab, one of the massive podcasts, he had it on his wall in his son's room, and he kept looking at it. And Venus had a moon called Zoozve, Zoozve. But he was like, well, he knew science. He knows that Venus doesn't have a moon. So what the hell was going on there? He started looking into it more and more, and he got in touch with Alex, who is the illustrator, Alex Foster. And Alex said, I just found it on some little slip of paper, right? It turns out, for a very brief moment, a quasi-moon had been discovered going around Venus in 2002 and was given the name 2002VE. But Alex misread it as Zoozve and put it on this thing. Now, there are certain rules about when a quasi-moon can be named. There's a planetary naming system that goes on.
Yeah.
One thing is you have to have had a paper or a book written about it. So between 2002 and this being drawn and then this discovery by this Radiolab guy, a paper had been written. So officially, it can now be named, and it has been officially named Zoozve.
Oh, wow.
So the picture
That's
is
so
now
funny.
accurate.
Amazing.
I remember finding a pill outside my house, which I thought must have been some drug dealer had dropped it or something. And it was called ZOMG, like OMG, but with a Z at the start.
Okay.
And I put a picture of it on the internet and said, does anyone know what drug this is? And apparently it just was 20 milligrams of paracetamol.
I love you bringing up the police. I found a drugs nest. It's called Boots, and they have all sorts of stuff.
It is time for fact number 3, and that is Anna.
My fact this week is that in 18th century Japan, you could eat vegetarian goose.
Wow. And do you mean that the goose itself is not eating meat, or?
No, an actual vegetarian option in restaurants in 18th century Japan. This is just them being way ahead of their time. I came across this in a book from 1790 called Recipes from the Soy Garden, or I think it's finally been reproduced in English, and it's been titled Recipes from the Garden of Paradise or something. And it's by a guy called Yuan Mei, who was China's most famous poet. So you'd expect him to be writing recipe books. And he had a recipe in there for mock roast goose, and he said the way you made it was you wrap yam in tofu skin. And that was it. And I couldn't find many more details on how to do it, but I imagine you get a load of yams, you kind of sculpt it into the shape of goose, and then you wrap it in what's actually this thing called yuba, which is a really interesting ingredient, but it's the skin that you get on the top of soy milk. So, if you have normal dairy milk, then you have that delicious skin on the top of it. Soy milk, same thing.
Yeah.
They would peel it off very carefully, hang it up, and then allow more and more skin to form, and that's a really crucial ingredient of its own.
Yeah.
And you'd wrap the yam in that.
And actually, they'd make some stuff just from that yuba, didn't they? They
Yeah.
make vegetarian stuff because when it comes out, it's really sort of like plasticine and you can mold it into any shape you want. And so you could shape it into any meat you wanted. So there were dishes like Buddha's chicken, Buddha's fish, Buddha's duck, molded pig's head, molded ham. And they were all made out of this yuba that was just put into different shapes.
It's very cool.
I didn't realize that it was virtually invented, the idea of this fake meat, as a transition to get you to just being a vegetarian. It was like weaning you off the real deal. So
Right.
you would slowly get the sensation that you were eating this thing still, but it wasn't what it was. And then eventually be like, well, yeah, I don't really fancy meat anymore. And then you go straight to the veggie stuff. Yeah.
But I think
Almost
you are
all-
full vegetarian if you're eating yam in the shape of a goose. I think that's fine. You don't need to go any further.
That's true.
not-
Yes.
But sometimes you need the psychological
Definitely.
reasoning to go, oh, I'm still having...
I guess like today, if you have an Impossible Burger or something, it's like a transition to...
Yeah.
Because you still kind of want the taste of meat, but you...
Yeah.
I know, but I think you're there. I really do.
Yeah.
It's okay. Keep eating the yammy goose.
But I do. I've just stuck on the fake meats now, which I really.
They're really
they're,
nice.
oh, they're
Yeah.
sort of fascinating as well as pretty good. A lot of them. Anyway, one of the things. Sorry, I've completely lost my train of thought.
Can I just quickly just add to that?
I'll get it back. We just got to sit in silence.
Okay, sure.
No, sure. Add to it.
No. I believe in you. You can do it.
Now the pressure's on.
I
No,
think
but-
if you had a bit more protein in your diet, you wouldn't have this problem.
So all I was going to say was that it's almost all the way through history. So tofu was invented at about 200 BC was when it started being invented. It's almost all either religious reasons or times of extreme economic hardship where there just isn't any meat to go around. And those are the two huge factors until recently when it's been more of a climaty thing.
Right.
But in the 1990s, Cuba had a big economic crisis. And they made a thing that was steak, but it was made from breaded and fried grapefruit rind. And it was, I mean, they had a lot
Wow,
of stuff.
an even less delicious part of a grapefruit, which already is quite disgusting.
There was soy picadillo, which I found described in the Havana Times as the worst ground meat-like substance that any human beings ever tasted in the 20th century.
Wow.
So it is,
Wow.
doesn't always work.
In the Oxford Companion to Food, which I think we've all dipped into from time to time, and in England is probably the Bible of facts about food. When you go into the fake meat section, they say that bread people is part of this whole thing. And bread people is basically a human made out of bread. I guess it's a bit like a gingerbread man, right?
So is it a mythical sort of like
No, it's
folklore?
just like, it's literally just like a loaf of bread, but it's in the shape of a person.
And they used to bake bread like this, didn't they?
Well, they say, and they also Companion to Food, that it is almost universal through all cultures in history.
Well, they've always had a bread
They've
person
always
in
had
their
bread
culture.
people, and they say that they are a form of guilt-free cannibalism.
Oh, that's what I was wondering. Is that the transition away from eating human to slowly...
It says the taboo of eating fellow humans is almost universal, and so we have to eat bread instead.
Wow.
I don't know what the celiac, gluten-free people do. They probably keep doing the cannibalism.
You've got to. You've got to. I did read that in the Second World War, people were encouraged to eat meat substitute, and brown bread was advertised as a meat substitute because
Really?
it has, I think it had slightly more protein, I think, than white bread. So it was in all over the newspapers and stuff. You know, hey, rather than eating a steak, try a loaf of brown bread.
Yeah, it is true. One of the founders of alternative meat, as it gets called, or sort of artificial meat or cultured meat, was a guy called Willem van Eelen, and he was Dutch, and he had his experience in the Second World War, his formative experience, because he was in a prisoner of war camp, a Japanese one, and food was incredibly short, and he was very lucky to live and not starve. And a few years after the war, he went to medical school in 1948, and he found that researchers there, they were trying to grow some cells in a tank. They weren't trying to grow it for meat. They were trying to grow it as a skin graft thing. If you've been burned, to graft
really?
on your skin. And his first thought, because of his formative experiences in the war, were, I wonder if we could eat that. He had just been so hungry for such a long time, it had really sort of imprinted itself on his consciousness, and that set him on the path of developing cultured meat.
Wow, you'd
Yeah.
be nervous around him, I think. Whatever,
Yeah.
any exposed body parts, cover him up.
It's almost like in a cartoon where he turns around and looks at you and you've turned into a roast chicken.
Yeah, it was a bit like that for him. Yeah.
That's incredible. Apparently, peanut butter was invented largely as a substitute for people who found it really hard to eat meat.
Oh,
and
really?
needed to be
George
weaned off
Washington
it.
Carver.
Yeah, I think, or it might have been a Kellogg version of peanut butter. So, like, there was quite a few peanut butter innovations going on at the time.
Kellogg certainly promoted nut meat. Yeah.
Yeah, nut meat.
I actually have a slight
That
problem
is
with
You
I'm
okay,
good,
hon?
thank you.
You've hardly touched your nut meat.
None of this stuff is substitute meat, though. It annoys me so much. Like in China, ancient China and Japan, they were just eating tofu and soy because they ate tofu and soy as well. And this is when you read it in the 19th century, when it was just coming to Britain and to Europe, and like all of these Chinese, Japanese recipes were coming over. They were actually really positive across the media. They were like, "Wow, this soy stuff can be made into a thing that is a little bit like meat." But because it didn't have the connotation of, oh, we're going to take away your meat and make you eat soy, then no one was negative about it. It's really interesting to see. But yeah, there was fake sausages. I think the first reference to a fake sausage came in 1851.
Right.
And it was described as being by a Grahamite, which I didn't know what that was. Do you know what a Grahamite?
It's a religious
Yeah.
thing.
Yes. And do you know what we get from Grahamites today?
Graham's crackers.
Yeah, I never knew this.
Really?
Graham, which is actually a thing I only know from Friends episodes because I think they're an
Yeah,
American
I'm not
thing.
convinced I know what one is.
No.
Yeah, they don't exist. So, like shooting stars, it's all a prank.
He was a big old veggie anyway, and he invented sort of bread. He thought that bread had been tortured the way we made it because we ground it so hard. So he said that we should make bread but leave the flour much rougher and coarser. So that's what Graham's crackers are made of.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
So Impossible Foods, Impossible Burgers
Yeah.
and stuff, they are tested on animals.
Really?
As in, they're fed to animals to see if they like them. or
So they have this thing called heme in it, which is a vegetable-based liquid that looks a little bit like blood. And so you put it in your fake burgers, and then when you cut into it, it looks like there's blood in your burgers.
Right.
And that's what people want. But the USDA...
Because people are normal.
Yeah, no, like, sure, I love them. I think they're delicious. But the USDA said that even though they appear to be safe, they needed to be tested properly before they can go into the burgers. And they could have done it without testing on animals, but it would have taken years and years and years.
Right.
And so they tested just on one animal, actually. Or certainly just one or two. The guy who was in charge of it, Patrick O'Brown, has basically come out and said, yeah, look, we had to do it, really. And, like, it was just a one-off. And we think that overall, holistically, it's better that we did that one small thing because overall it's a good thing.
Yeah.
you know tofurkey?
Yeah.
Familiar with tofurkey?
No.
A tofu turkey.
It's vegetarian turkey.
It's quite American, isn't it?
It
I
is,
think it was
it's
a big
American,
thing
yeah.
in the 90s.
Well, the guy who invented it, Seth Tibbott, was so broke when he invented tofurkey that he was living in a treehouse. And it wasn't even, he was renting a treehouse rather really.
I've actually stayed in a couple of Airbnb tree houses, and they are not cheap, I've got to say.
Yeah.
Oh, well. he was renting the trees. He rented 3 trees and built the treehouse in between them. From
Cool.
a farmer he knew.
Oh, you can't do that.
What do you mean?
You can't rent a tree and then build property on.
Well, he had asked for permission to do it.
Oh, okay. You
Yeah,
left that bit out.
Sorry.
Amazing.
Anyway, there you go.
Guys, I will have to move us on to our
Oh.
final fact in a second. So, yeah, if you've got anything.
Guess what the first meat that NASA experimented with growing so that potentially astronauts could culture their own sort of cell-cultured meat in space was? Guess what the first meat they tried was?
Oh, well, steak.
Goldfish.
Goldfish? Come on, Ben.
Yep, they took some goldfish steaks and they tried to
Goldfish
grow the...
steaks? If I order a steak and that comes, I am sending it back.
Yeah, they were just trying to grow the goldfish muscle in the...
How was it?
Yeah.
Was it good?
It must have been like, because they do grow quite big
can
goldfish,
imagine,
don't
yeah.
they? It's not like one of those little ones you get in the fair.
I don't think so, no. But I think, anyway, it was
That's
an
so
interesting...
funny.
I don't think it even got to being tasted. But,
Yeah, right.
Can I quickly tell you, do you
Yeah.
know why soy sauce is called soy sauce?
Because it has soy in it?
And it's sausage.
Dan is actually right about the sauce bit. No, soy beans are named after soy sauce.
come off it.
No. How does that work? How did they get? Who found the first soy
Oh my God,
sauce?
that's like the time loop there.
You grow soy sauce and you separate it into beans. Yeah, we just got soy, which again came over from Japan. It was about 1300s. It was called shoyu, the sauce that they made from beans, which they didn't call shoyu beans. They called it something different. And so we've a couple of hundred years called it, and all across Europe, variations of soy sauce. No one knew what it was made of, so everyone tried to make substitutes out of. The first ketchup was an attempt to make soy sauce,
Oh,
and they
so
tried
like fish and mushrooms and all that stuff.
exactly,
Right?
yeah, a lot of mushroom attempts, and then they realised, oh, they use this weird bean. Let's call it the soybean. And that's why
That's
we call it
amazing.
that.
It's time for our final fact of the show, and that is my fact. My fact this week is that after Bruce Lee died, Chinese movie studios tried to exploit the gap he left by immediately releasing films starring Bruce Lee, Lee Bruce, and Brute Lee. This is called Bruceploitation, where after he sadly passed away very prematurely, the Chinese studios went, America wants Bruce Lee movies. So he did Enter the Dragon. Quickly, let's get Re-Enter the Dragon into production. They like the name Bruce and Lee. Quickly, let's just find other people and name them that in very similar ways. Bruce Lee is now starring in Bruce Lee versus Superman, which is a movie, by the way, from this period.
Okay, so they didn't find people with these names. They found people and then gave them these names.
Yeah,
I think
they
that's-
changed.
I think that's an easier way of doing it, to be fair.
Yeah.
Because if you find Lee Bruce or whatever, and he's like an out-of-work accountant, then it's going to be harder to get him in shape, isn't it?
I don't know if
no, I
there's
see
two Patrick Stewarts, you're gonna get.
Dan, I'm presuming you're a big Bruce Lee fan.
Yeah.
Isn't you?
Yeah, grew up on it.
Because you grew up in Hong Kong. And
Yeah.
yeah. Have you seen The Game of Death?
Yeah, this was the movie he was making. He died halfway through making.
Exactly. And they had a problem because they had 40 minutes of Bruce Lee footage, and you're not allowed to make a film that's 40 minutes long. So they just hired body doubles. They put them in sunglasses. They filmed them, at a distance or
Really?
in silhouette. Or they used some footage of Bruce Lee's actual funeral. Bit weird.
Wow.
Yeah.
Also completely ruins the point of the film, I'd guess, if you think, oh, well, there he is, he's dead. But anyway,
Yeah.
and they just sort of fattened the thing up into a Bruce Lee movie. And it was 5 years after his death that they released this.
Well, that's
so
the thing. I mean, if you look at the list of movies, like that was called Game of Death.
Yeah.
They then released New Game of Death. Like Bruce Lee, the star of all stars. Bruce Lee's Secret. Bruce Lee in New Guinea.
It's so weird that there was this massive demand because I really didn't know anything about Bruce Lee and didn't know how fascinated I'd be by him. He is an amazing character. But I also didn't realize he was not big really at all until he died in America. So he was massive in Hong Kong. He'd done, I think it was his fourth American film, Enter the Dragon, and that was really the film that made him really big and everyone loved him. And he died a couple of weeks before the premiere, 3 weeks before the premiere, very, very young, very sadly, in his early 30s. And yeah, hadn't been big at all before then, and then was this huge deal. But the New York Times obituary when he died, 3 weeks before that big film came out, said, his films were successful in New York despite unanimously disapproving reviews, and the film Fist of Fury makes the worst Italian Western look like the most solemn and noble achievements of the early Soviet cinema.
Wow, that's in his obituary.
Yeah, and that's it. It was nothing good.
Wow.
It said he had begun to win audiences in Latin America. The end.
Wow.
So weird.
Because he's big all over the world now, right?
Yeah.
I think, because I was in Mostar in Bosnia, and there's a statue of him there in the middle of Mostar, which I saw. And the reason that there's a statue there is because it was just after the Balkan War. They had the Croatians, the Bosnians, the Serbians,
Everybody was kung fu fighting, yes. I'm very sorry to trivialize what was an appalling conflict.
And it was a little bit frightening, yes. But they needed a statue of someone, and they couldn't decide who to get a statue of. And BruceLee was the only one that everyone agreed they liked.
Wow. Really?
And it's still there in the middle
Kind
of
of
the park,
unifying
just
figure.
outside of town, yeah.
Amazing. I'd heard of the statue. I had no idea that was the reason
Yeah.
for it.
Someone stole it, right?
It was there when I was there.
Right. I think
Is
at
that-
one point it got stolen. They didn't see who it was. It was as fast as lightning, but it was. but it was stolen. And apparently during that fight where they put it up as a bit of peace, the way they faced it was towards one of the, the sides. So the statue of Bruce in a fighting stance to them was offensive because they were like, you're suggesting Bruce is on your team now and he's fighting us.
I heard that as well.
Yeah.
But again, contained multitudes, Bruce Lee. So he wrote a lot of poetry, which was published. Former Hong Kong Cha-Cha champion.
That's the champion of the cha-cha dance,
Yes. Sorry, I didn't just
You weren't
develop
stuttering.
a temporary localized stutter, yeah. And his wife was Swedish-American.
Hey!
Interesting fact. And that was...
The wife who he cheated on to shag the mistress whose house he was found dead in.
Hey! Who was a good friend of my mum and dad.
Betty Ting, the woman whose house he died in, knows your mum and dad. The woman who there were conspiracy theories all over the world that she was somehow responsible for his death.
My parents started those conspiracy theories.
Certainly runs in the family.
Yeah.
Wow. A lot of his films, when they were filming the fight scenes, the extras in Enter the Dragon, many of them were actually in local gangs or triad gangs in Hong Kong. So quite frequently they would keep fighting after the director yelled cut.
Yes. Cut! Yes, I have been! Because that's the thing with Bruce Lee, right? He was in gangs in Hong Kong, is that right?
He had to, yeah.
So, tell the story, Dan.
Well, no, when he was young, he got in a fight. He picked a wrong fight with a gang leader, and that's the reason he ended up going over to America, because he was fleeing death, basically. He had to get away.
That's right. And then he was a great martial artist, but he did lots of different martial arts. But he always said that the reason he was so good at it is because his right leg is 1 inch shorter than his left leg, which apparently helped his kicking.
Did he?
And he was also nearsighted, so he liked to do close combat because then he could see the person he was hitting.
Well, apparently on set one day, they were in an area where the locals were very unhappy that they were filming there. And he was talking to the director, and they were standing on a sort of hilltop, and they started getting surrounded by the locals, and they knew that something bad was about to happen. And apparently what Bruce did was he jumped into the air, and he pulled a perfect horizontal plank, basically, in the air.
Okay.
So like the way he jumped, it looked like he was levitating, and then he came back down on his legs. And apparently everyone was like, wow, Bruce! And then they didn't beat them up. At least that's the story my parents have been telling me.
He was supposed to be drafted by the US Army. In fact, he was drafted. But he didn't see any service because he failed a medical. Apparently, he had bad eyesight, as I said. He had a sinus disorder, and he only had 1 testicle.
Oh, yeah.
So it's quite interesting because that means I couldn't get in the US Army because I also have bad sinuses.
But you have 3 testicles, which might make you a
super soldier, yeah. Was it that one had not descended?
Yeah, it's just not descended.
Yeah. I read that put as so it was impossible to kick Bruce Lee in the testicles. It's pretty cool.
That's true. You could kick him in the testicle, though, which
could.
I should imagine
Had the
that's
same
just
effect.
as bad.
Yeah. I did read. So there's a book called The Tao of Bruce Lee, which I was reading about by an author called David Miller, and he reckons that Bruce Lee actually, really, in his life, he only had a few proper fights. Obviously it's mostly screen and training and all of this. And he says, I just wanted to quote this. I really like this line. He was an absolutely remarkable man, but he wasn't the Jesus of martial arts, and that's the way he's often presented these days.
Yeah.
Could he have stuck his fingers in your eyes more quickly than anyone else on the planet? Maybe so. But what you have to remember is that is exactly what he would have done. That's real fighting. He would have stuck his fingers in your eyes, kicked you in the leg, and got the hell out of there.
Right.
And that's apparently
Apparently he was so quick, what he could do is if you laid your palm out and you had a £1 coin on there, he could grab it out of your hand before you closed your hand, and then when you opened your hand, he had replaced the £1 with a penny.
Okay.
As you were opening it.
That's you were like, what? So imagine like you were Bruce and I was go, and I closed my hand and I'm like, haha, you didn't get it. And then I open it and I see you've changed. You were so quick, you took it and you put a new coin in place of my coin.
Oh, I suppose as you picked up the £1, you've put a penny in. Yeah, I could do that. I could do that. He seemed to set some weird targets for himself. He was like the original Guinness World Record breaker and then break them. And he did want to kind of hone himself into this perfect human specimen, which weirdly people thought might be why he died. There was a thought that He just had eradicated from his body all extraneous anything, and that sort of killed him somehow. Yeah, it's not very
Dad, what do your parents think of that one?
That's not the story at the Schreiber dinner table, I can tell you that.
I buy this. So, right, because there are lots of theories. One is that he died of a swelling of the brain, which I think is what was the official finding from the inquiry.
Yeah, I think the brain definitely did swell, but it was as to why.
Well, is it because he was so fit? He got rid of all fat, so there was no subcutaneous fat on his body at all. That could be a problem. So this was his routine when he died, right? He drank liquidized steak and cow's blood every morning. Then he ran 7 miles.
Wait. Goldfish steak?
Then he would run 7 miles with his Great Dane dog, some of it backwards, some of it up the side of trees.
Checked out, yeah.
And he was just too fit. Also, there's another theory that he didn't have any sweat glands.
He didn't have any sweat glands because he'd had them, and this is the idea that he died of heat, like overheating, because he'd had his armpit glands removed out of vanity. And let this be a lesson to the vain that he thought that sweating made him look bad on screen.
Right.
And then I found this most plausible theory about his death, because he'd had a brain swelling a few weeks earlier. Well, no one knows, no one knows what killed him.
But almost all your sweat comes out of the rest of you.
Yes, I think he would just probably overheated anyway. It was a very hot day, and he had this habit of whenever he was getting excited talking about a project of like acting out the whole film. So the person who was with him said he'd literally acted out the martial arts of an entire film that he was planning to do.
Can you emergency get rid of the heat? Like, can you just drool a lot? And like, is there to get
Panting,
that to get just the liquid out of you?
Pop in a cold bath, maybe. I don't know, but it's a shame because we never got to find out whether he achieved one thing he wanted to do, which was first of all, he was experimenting with electroshocking himself. So in his sleep, he ran electricity through his muscles to fine-tune his reflexes. And he said that by the end of the year, he was going to be able to drive his fingers right up to the middle knuckle through pine planks.
Wow.
And we never will know if he could do that with just one finger through a plank of wood.
It's a shame that didn't come through the coffin lid. I need to wrap this up, guys. We've got to the end of our show. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening to our dorky facts. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to get in touch with any of us about the things that we've said over the course of this podcast, we can all be found on our social media accounts. I'm on @Schreiberland. James?
My Instagram is no such thing as James Harkin.
Andy?
Andrew Hunter M on Twitter.
Yep. Or if you want to get to us as a group, where do we go?
You can go to @NoSuchThing on Twitter or @NoSuchThing as a fish on Instagram or email podcast@qi.com.
Yeah, and check out our website. If anyone wants to come to a live show like this, we are doing more dates around the UK, and we're going to Australia and New Zealand. But for now, Gothenburg Book Festival. Thank you so much. That was awesome. What a treat.
Absolutely awesome. We'll be back again. We'll see you then. Goodbye.